There was a time when a man understood that the food on his table was made with love. When sitting down to a home-cooked meal was not just about eating, but about respecting the person who spent hours in that kitchen making sure the family was fed. But what one husband did on Family Feud would make Steve Harvey angrier than anyone had ever seen him on live television. When this man opened his mouth and disrespected his wife in front of 200 people and millions of viewers, Steve Harvey did not laugh. He did not move on to the next question. He stopped the entire show, looked that man dead in the eyes, and said something that left the whole studio shaking. By the time it was over, every woman in that audience was on her feet, and the husband could not even look up from the floor. Before we get into this story, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to this channel right now. Turn on notifications so you never miss another one of these incredible moments. I promise you, this one is going to stay with you long after you finish watching. Steve Harvey has hosted Family Feud for well over a decade. He has heard thousands of answers, some brilliant, some ridiculous, and some that made him question everything about humanity. But on a Monday afternoon in September 2024, a man named Glenn Whitaker gave an answer that crossed a line Steve Harvey was not willing to let slide. And what happened next became one of the most powerful moments in the history of the show. Not because of a record-breaking score, not because of a big prize, but because a host decided that some things matter more than entertainment. Her name was Denise Whitaker. She was 52 years old, a quiet woman with soft brown eyes and hands that told the story of a lifetime of hard work. Denise had been a homemaker for 27 years. She married Glenn right out of high school in a small town outside of Savannah, Georgia, and from the day they said their vows, Denise had poured every ounce of herself into taking care of that family. She raised 3 children practically on her own while Glenn worked long hours as a regional sales manager. Their oldest, Tanya, was 26 and worked as a dental hygienist. Their middle child, Andre, was 23 and had just started his first real job out of college. The youngest, Destiny, was 17 and still in high school. All 3 of them were kind, respectful, and well-raised. And every single one of them would tell you the same thing if you asked. Everything good about this family started in Mama's kitchen. Denise's cooking was legendary in their community. Not restaurant famous or social media famous, the kind of famous that matters more. Neighborhood famous. Church famous. The kind of famous where people showed up to every potluck hoping Denise had brought her sweet potato pie. The kind where the pastor's wife called Denise first when they needed food for a funeral reception. The kind where her children's friends would find excuses to come over on Sunday afternoons because they knew Denise would be making her biscuits and smothered chicken. Denise had learned to cook from her grandmother, Mama Roz, who had raised 7 children on a sharecropper's income in rural Georgia. Mama Roz could take almost nothing and turn it into a meal that made people feel like they had everything. She taught Denise that cooking was not just about feeding stomachs. It was about feeding souls. Every recipe Mama Roz passed down came with a story, a memory, and a lesson. The collard greens recipe came with the story of how Mama Roz's mother used to sing hymns while she cooked. The cornbread recipe came with the lesson that you never rush good bread, just like you never rush good love. The peach cobbler recipe came with the memory of Mama Roz's husband, who worked in the orchards and would bring home bruised peaches that nobody else wanted, and Mama Roz would turn them into the sweetest dessert anyone had ever tasted. Denise carried all of that with her into her own kitchen. Every meal she cooked for her family was an act of love that she never talked about because she did not think it needed talking about. She woke up before everyone else to make breakfast. She packed lunches with handwritten notes tucked inside the brown bags. She had dinner on the table every evening at 6 o'clock no matter how tired she was, no matter how her back ached, no matter how little Glenn seemed to notice, and that was the thing about Glenn. He had stopped noticing a long time ago. Somewhere over the course of 27 years, the meals that Denise poured her heart into had become background noise to him. He would eat without commenting. He would push his plate away without saying thank you. And in recent years, he had started making remarks. Little ones at first. A joke here and there about how the chicken was dry or the rice was overcooked. comments that Denise would brush off with a small laugh, even though they cut her deeper than she would ever admit. But the jokes had gotten worse. At family gatherings, Glenn would loudly suggest they order takeout instead of eating Denise's food. He would compare her cooking unfavorably to restaurants, to his mother's cooking, to meals he had on business trips. He once told Denise in front of their children that he did not understand why she spent so much time in the kitchen when the results were so average. Denise had gone to their bedroom that night and cried quietly into her pillow while Glenn watched television in the living room, completely unaware that he had broken something inside his wife that would take years to repair. The children saw it. Tanya, the oldest, had confronted her father about it more than once. She told him he was being cruel and disrespectful. Glenn would laugh it off and say Tanya was being too sensitive, that it was just jokes, that Denise knew he did not mean anything by it. But Denise's eyes told a different story. The light that used to shine when she set a plate on the table had been dimming for years. She still cooked every day, she still put in the same effort, but she had stopped expecting anyone to appreciate it. She had stopped expecting Glenn to see her. The Family Feud application was Tanya's idea. She wanted her mother to have a fun experience, something that was just for joy. She organized the whole thing and drove the family to Atlanta for the taping. Denise was nervous but excited. She had never been on television before. She wore her best dress, the lavender one she saved for Easter Sundays, and she had her hair done for the first time in months. She looked beautiful, and for the first time in a long time, she looked like she felt it too. The Whittaker family was matched against the Okafor family from Charlotte, North Carolina. The Okafors were a Nigerian-American family with incredible energy. The mother, Chioma, was a force of nature who had the audience cheering within seconds of walking on stage. Steve Harvey loved them immediately. The matchup promised great television, and the first round did not disappoint. The Whittakers held their own. Denise was surprisingly sharp with her answers. She got 2 top responses in the first round, and Steve complimented her both times. "Denise, you are on fire today," Steve said, and Denise beamed. It was the first time in a while that someone had praised her so directly, and the warmth of it showed all over her face. Tanya squeezed her mother's arm and whispered, "See, Mama, I told you." Glenn was performing too, but in a different way. He was loud. He was playing to the crowd. He cracked jokes and mugged for the cameras and made sure everyone knew he was the personality of the family. Steve played along because that is what Steve does. He finds the energy in every family and rides it. But even Steve could see that Glenn's energy was less about fun and more about control. He was the kind of man who needed to be the center of every room, even when the room was a television studio and the moment belonged to someone else. Then came the question that changed everything. It was the face-off round. Denise and Chioma were at the podiums. Steve read the card. "We surveyed 100 people. Name something a wife does that her husband does not appreciate enough." The audience gave a knowing murmur. It was one of those questions that everyone has an opinion about. Chioma buzzed in first. "Cooking," she said without hesitation. The board lit up. Number 1 answer. The Okafor family erupted in celebration. Chioma pointed at her husband Emeka and said, "You better be taking notes." The audience loved it. Steve doubled over laughing. The Okafors decided to play. They ran through 3 more answers before getting their 3rd strike. The question came back to the Whittakers. They needed to find one of the remaining answers to steal. The family huddled. Tanya suggested cleaning. Andre said emotional support. Destiny said laundry. Glenn had been quiet during the huddle, which was unusual for him. Then, just as the family was about to give their answer, Glenn stepped forward. He walked up to the podium with that salesman's grin on his face, the one that was designed to make people laugh even when what he was saying was not funny. He looked at Steve, looked at the camera, and said, "Steve, I'm going to be honest with you. My wife's cooking is the one thing I definitely do now to appreciate." He paused for comedic timing. "Because it is not worth appreciating." He laughed. He actually laughed at his own words. He turned and looked back at his family expecting them to laugh too. Nobody was laughing. The audience gave a scattered, uncomfortable chuckle, the kind that comes not from finding something funny, but from not knowing how to react. A few people in the front rows had their mouths open. Chioma Okafor, still standing near the other podium, looked at Denise with an expression that every woman in that studio understood. It was the look of one woman recognizing another woman's pain. And Denise stood perfectly still. She did not cry. She did not yell. She looked at her husband like she was seeing him clearly for the first time in years, like a veil had been lifted, and the man standing at that podium, grinning like he had just told the funniest joke in the world, was exactly who she had been afraid he was all along. Tanya took a step forward, her face tight with barely controlled anger. Andre put his hand on his mother's back. Destiny looked down at the floor. The Whitaker children had seen their father do this 100 times in private, but watching him do it on national television, watching him humiliate their mother in front of 200 strangers, was something else entirely. Steve Harvey did not laugh. He did not smile. He did not move on to the next question or crack a follow-up joke to ease the tension. He stood completely still, and the expression on his face was one that longtime viewers of the show had rarely seen. It was not his comedic shock face. It was not his exaggerated disbelief face. It was real. It was the face of a man who had just watched something happen that offended him on a personal level. Steve set his cards down on the podium. He adjusted his tie, and then he walked toward Glenn with a calm, deliberate stride that made the entire studio hold its breath. "Glenn," Steve said. His voice was quiet, but carried through every speaker in the building. "I need you to look at me." Glenn's smile started to fade. He could feel the temperature in the room shift. This was not banter. This was not part of the show. "I need you to turn around." Steve continued, "And look at your wife." Glenn hesitated. He glanced at the camera as if looking for someone to rescue him. Nobody moved. He turned slowly and looked at Denise. She was standing with her hands clasped in front of her, her chin raised slightly, her eyes glistening but refusing to let a single tear fall. She looked like a woman who had practiced being strong so many times that it had become her armor. "Do you see her?" Steve asked. "Do you actually see her? Because I don't think you do. I think you stopped seeing her a long time ago." The studio was completely silent. Not a cough, not a whisper. 200 people sat motionless, watching Steve Harvey do something that nobody expected but everybody needed. Steve turned to the audience and said, "Folks, I need a minute here. Because what just happened is not a joke, and I am not going to treat it like one." He turned back to Glenn. "I've been married 3 times, Steve said. "And I have made more mistakes than I can count. I have taken people for granted. I have said things I cannot take back. So I am not standing here pretending to be perfect. But I am standing here as a man who learned, the hard way, that the woman who feeds your family, who stands in that kitchen every single day and puts love on a plate for you, that woman deserves your respect. Not your jokes, not your ridicule, your respect." Steve's voice was steady, but there was a fire underneath it. "You just stood on my stage and told the world that your wife's cooking is not worth appreciating. Do you have any idea what you just said? Do you understand what that woman does every day for you? She gets up before you. She plans meals for your family. She cooks with recipes that her grandmother taught her, recipes that carry history and memory and love in every single ingredient. And you stood up here and called that worthless. On national television, in front of your children." Glenn's face had gone from confident to crumbling. His jaw was tight. His hands were at his sides, opening and closing like he did not know what to do with them. The salesman's grin was completely gone, replaced by something that looked like the beginning of understanding. Steve walked over to Denise. He stood beside her and spoke directly to her, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Denise, I want you to hear something from me, and I want you to hear it in front of all these people. What you do for your family matters. The meals you cook matter. The time you spend in that kitchen matters. The love you put into every plate matters. And anyone who tells you otherwise, including the man you married, is wrong." Denise's armor cracked. The tears she had been holding back since Glenn's comment finally fell. Not dramatic, heavy tears, quiet, relieved tears. The kind that come when someone finally says the thing you have needed to hear for years. Chioma Okafor, who had been watching silently from across the stage, did something that was completely unscripted. She walked over to Denise and hugged her. A complete stranger, a woman from another family and another team, crossed the stage and wrapped her arms around Denise like they had known each other their whole lives. "Your cooking matters, sister," Chioma said into her ear, but the microphone caught it. "Don't you ever let anyone tell you it does not." The audience exploded. Women stood up. The applause was not the kind you hear after a good game show answer. It was the kind that comes from the gut. The kind that says, "We see you and you are not alone." Tanya walked to the front of the stage. She was crying, but her voice was clear and strong. "Mr. Harvey, can I say something?" Steve nodded. Tanya looked at her father. "Dad, Mama has cooked for you every single day for 27 years. Every single day she has never once complained. She has never taken a day off. She gets up when it is still dark to make your breakfast, before you leave for work. She packs your lunch with a napkin, folded the way you like it. She has dinner waiting when you walk through the door, even on the days when her back hurts so bad she can barely stand. And you think that is a joke." Tanya's voice broke slightly, but she steadied herself. "Mama learned to cook from Mama Roz. Those are not just recipes, Dad, those are heirlooms. They are the only thing our great-grandmother left behind, and every time Mama cooks those dishes, she is keeping Mama Roz alive. She is keeping our history alive, and you just stood on national television and said it was not worth appreciating." Andrew stepped forward too. The 23-year-old who had been quiet all day finally spoke. "Dad, when I moved away for college, the thing I missed most was not my room. It was not my friends. It was Mom's cooking. I used to call her on Sundays just to ask what she was making, because her food was the thing that made me feel like I was still home, even when I was 400 miles away. That is what you just made fun of." Even Destiny, the youngest at 17, looked at her father and said simply, "That was mean, Dad, and you know it." Glenn Whitaker stood on that stage surrounded by his family, and for the first time in perhaps decades, he had nowhere to hide, no joke to make, no audience to charm, no way to deflect. His wife was in tears. His children were confronting him. A television host had just publicly held a mirror up to his behavior, and a stranger had crossed a stage to comfort the woman he should have been comforting all along. Glenn's voice came out rough and unsteady. I didn't know it meant that much. I thought they were just jokes. I thought she knew I was kidding." Steve stepped in one more time. "Glenn, let me explain something to you. When you make a joke about someone every day, and they stop laughing, it is not a joke anymore. It is a wound. And when you do it to the person who feeds you, who serves you, who puts their love on your plate night after night, you are not being funny. You are being ungrateful, and ungrateful is one of the ugliest things a man can be." Steve softened slightly. "But here is the good news. You are standing here right now. Your wife is standing here right now. Your children are standing here telling you the truth because they love you enough to be honest with you. That means it is not too late. But Glenn, you need to walk over to that woman, and you need to tell her what her cooking means to you. Not to me, not to the audience, to her. And you need to mean it." The studio went quiet again. Glenn stood still for a long moment. Then he walked over to Denise. He took her hands, and for the first time in years, he looked at her without performing, without joking, without deflecting. Just a man looking at the woman he had been taking for granted. "Denise," he said, and his voice cracked on her name. "I am sorry. Not just for today. For every time I made you feel like what you do does not matter. For every joke. For every time I pushed my plate away without saying thank you. For every time I made you feel invisible in your own kitchen. I was wrong. I have been wrong for a long time, and I am sorry." Denise looked at her husband. She did not rush to forgive. She did not collapse into his arms. She took a breath, wiped her tears, and said, "Glenn, I have been cooking for this family for 27 years. Not because I had to. Because I wanted to. Because Mama Roz taught me that when you feed someone, you are telling them they matter. Every meal I have ever cooked for you was my way of saying I love you. And all I ever needed was for you to say it back." Glenn pulled her into his arms. The audience gave them a standing ovation that lasted nearly a minute. Steve Harvey stood a few steps away, wiping his face with his handkerchief, and when the applause finally died down, he said, "That right there. That is what this show is supposed to be about. Not points. Not prizes. People remembering what matters. After the taping ended, Steve Harvey did something he almost never does. He walked off the stage with the Whittaker family and sat with them in the green room for nearly 45 minutes. There were no cameras, no producers hovering. Just a conversation between people who all understood that something important had just happened. Steve told Glenn that he recognized himself in him, that he had been that man, the man who made jokes at his wife's expense because it was easier than being vulnerable, the man who confused teasing with connection and did not realize the damage until it was almost too late. He told Glenn that changing this pattern was not about one apology on a stage. It was about waking up tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that and choosing to see your wife. Choosing to say thank you. Choosing to respect the things she does that nobody else notices. Steve also spent time with Denise. He told her something that she later said she would carry for the rest of her life. Denise, your grandmother gave you more than recipes. She gave you a superpower. You make people feel loved through food. Do not let anyone, not even the man you married, take that away from you. Chioma Okafor exchanged phone numbers with Dennis before the families left. A friendship that started with a hug between strangers on a game show stage would grow into something much deeper. The two women talked every week after the taping, bonding over their shared love of cooking and their experiences as women who had sometimes felt unseen by the people closest to them. Chioma invited Denise to Charlotte for a weekend, and the two spent 3 days cooking together, swapping recipes from their different traditions, and laughing in a way that Denise said she had not laughed in years. When the episode aired 7 weeks later, the reaction was immediate and massive. The clip of Steve calling out Glenn was shared millions of times within the first 48 hours. But it was Tanya's speech about Mama Roz's recipes being heirlooms, and Andre's confession about calling home on Sundays just to hear what his mother was cooking, that truly resonated with viewers. People posted their own stories in the comments by the thousands. Women who had been belittled for their domestic work wrote about how Denise's moment made them feel validated for the first time. Men wrote about how Steve's words made them think about things they had been taking for granted in their own homes. The phrase, "say it back," became a cultural moment. Denise's words to Glenn, that every meal she cooked was her way of saying I love you, and all she needed was for him to say it back, struck a chord that went far beyond one couple's marriage. People started using the phrase as a reminder to acknowledge the quiet acts of love that happen in every household. Spouses posted videos thanking each other for the unseen labor they had been overlooking. Children posted tributes to their parents' cooking, sharing recipes and memories. The hashtag #SayItBack was used hundreds of thousands of times in the weeks following the episode. Denise, who had never been on social media before the show, was encouraged by Tanya to share some of Mama Roz's recipes online. What started as a few posts quickly grew into something much larger. Denise began recording simple cooking videos from her kitchen in Savannah. No professional lighting, no fancy editing. Just Denise at her stove, cooking the dishes her grandmother taught her and telling the stories behind each one. The videos were warm, personal, and deeply comforting. People said watching Denise cook felt like being in their own grandmother's kitchen. Within 3 months, she had over 2 million followers. Glenn, for his part, went through a genuine transformation. He later said in an interview that standing on that stage while his wife cried, his children confronted him, and Steve Harvey told him he was ungrateful was the most painful moment of his life. But it was also the moment that saved him. He started going to counseling on his own before he and Denise began going together. He admitted that his jokes about her cooking were never really about the food. They were about his own insecurity, about feeling like he was not enough, and tearing down the one person who had always made him feel like he was more than enough. 3 months after the episode aired, Glenn posted a video that went viral. He was standing in the kitchen, wearing an apron, and Denise was teaching him how to make Mama Roz's peach cobbler. He was terrible at it. He burned the butter. He measured the sugar wrong. He put the peaches in before the crust was ready. Denise was patient with him, guiding his hands, laughing gently at his mistakes. And at the end of the video, when they pulled the cobbler out of the oven and it was lopsided and imperfect, Glenn took a bite and said with tears in his eyes, "This is the best thing I have ever tasted." Denise smiled and said, "That is because you made it with love." The video was viewed over 20 million times. 6 months later, Family Feud invited the Whittaker family back for a follow-up segment. The change was visible from the moment they walked on stage. Glenn was different, not loud, not performing. He held Denise's hand as they walked out, and when Steve asked how things were going, Glenn spoke first. "Steve, I want to thank you. You held up a mirror that day, and I did not like what I saw. But I needed to see it. I have spent the last 6 months learning how to appreciate the woman I married, and I have learned that appreciation is not a big word. It is a small one. It is thank you. It is this is delicious. It is I see you. It is saying it back." Denise spoke too, and her words were the ones that the audience carried with them. "Mama Roz always told me that the kitchen is the heart of the home. She said the food is just the beginning. The real nourishment is in the love and the time and the intention behind it. For 27 years, I cooked for my family because I believed that, and now, for the first time, my husband believes it too. That is all I ever wanted." Steve Harvey, visibly moved, told the audience something he said he had been thinking about since the original taping. "In all my years doing this show, I have given away a lot of money. But the most valuable thing I have ever done on this stage is remind a man to appreciate his wife's cooking. Because it was never about the food. It was about seeing the person behind the plate. And that is a lesson every single one of us can take home tonight." The follow-up segment showed one more thing. The Whittaker family had started a tradition every Sunday. Glenn sat in the kitchen with Denise while she cooked. Not to help, though he sometimes tried, but to be there, to keep her company, to listen to the stories behind the recipes. Denise said it had become her favorite part of the week, not because of what Glenn did, but because of what his presence said. It said, "I see you." It said, "What you do matters." It said, "I love you, and I am saying it back." Mama Roz's peach cobbler recipe was eventually published in a small community cookbook that Denise put together with Chioma's help. The cookbook was called Say It Back Recipes from the Heart of the Home, and every recipe included the story behind it, just the way Mama Roz would have wanted. All proceeds went to a local women's shelter in Savannah. The first printing sold out in a week. Denise's mother, who had watched the episode from her living room and cried through the whole thing, called her daughter that night and said, "Baby, Mama Roz is smiling right now. She always said the kitchen was where miracles happen." She was right. Years later, when people asked Steve Harvey about his most memorable moments on Family Feud, he always brought up Denise Whittaker. "She did not raise her voice," Steve would say. "She did not cause a scene. She just stood there with her dignity intact and waited for the world to see what her husband had been missing." That kind of strength does not make noise. It does not have to. It fills the room all by itself. The story of Denise and Glenn Whittaker became a reminder to millions of people that the most important things in a home are often the quietest things. The meals that appear on the table without anyone asking. The kitchen that smells like love at 6 o'clock every evening. The recipes passed down from grandmother to mother to daughter. These are not small things. They are the foundation of a family, and they deserve to be honored every single day. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about the person in your life who feeds your family and your soul, then please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel right now. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. And when you get home tonight, walk into that kitchen, look at the person who cooked for you, and say it back. Tell them it matters. Tell them you see them. Tell them thank you. Because those 3 words can change everything. We will see you in the next one.